If you're building beautiful furniture but have no idea if you're actually making money, you're not alone. Today, I'm breaking down the costs behind custom woodworking, what it really costs to build, and why sometimes walking away from the job is best. This video might just change how you price every project from here on out. When you're pricing your woodworking projects, especially custom furniture, it's easy to focus on what you see: the wood, the tools, the time you're putting in. But if you're trying to make this sustainable, maybe even profitable, you've got to understand both direct and indirect costs. Whether you're in a garage or running a full workshop, this stuff applies. Let's go over direct costs first. This is the stuff that goes into the piece. Raw materials: wood, hardware, finish. Hardwoods like walnut or maple will run you anywhere from $5 to $20 per board foot. And if you're using anything exotic, you could be looking at much higher per board foot. And don't forget, there's always waste. Between knots, bad grain, or cuts that don't go as planned, you might lose 10 to 15% of your material. Easy. So pad your material estimates by about 10 to 15%. Then there's labor. If it's just you, your time still has a cost. Even if you're not paying yourself a wage, a fair range is $25 to $40 an hour, depending on your skill level and what kind of work you're doing. If you're just starting out, minimum wage may be a good rate. This will help keep you competitive by keeping your price low. At this stage, you get to learn something new. It will take you a lot longer to build and will not be as polished as a pro. Then there's consumables, all those small but constant things that go straight into the build or get used up while making it. I'm talking about sandpaper, glue, screws, shop rags, polishing pads, buffing wheels, filters, vacuum bags, double-sided tape, even masking tape. If I use it on a project, it's part of the cost. That includes jig materials too, because sometimes I'm making a one-off jig just for a tricky angle or joint. It might not seem like much, but over time, these add up. So I usually estimate a flat amount per project, or I keep track if I'm going through a lot of something. Either way, consumables are definitely part of the direct cost. Sometimes you'll also have subcontracted work. Maybe you send something out for professional finishing or CNC cutting. These can easily add 10 to 20% to the job cost if you're not careful. Let's move on to indirect costs. Stuff that keeps the lights on, also known as overhead. These are the things you pay for whether or not you're working on a specific project. Things like rent or shop space. It could be your garage, which still has value and thus cost. Utilities like lights, machines, dust collection. This can range from $200 to $800 a month easy. Insurance and permits, even just liability, could cost $500 to $2,000 per year, and more if you've got employees or rented space. Marketing, websites, ads, fairs, maybe it's $200 a year, maybe it's $20,000, depends on how you grow. And admin stuff. If it's just you, that's your own time. If you've got a team, admin salaries can be $3,000 to $7,000 a month. Tool maintenance and depreciation. Blades get dull, parts break, machines wear out. Budget something like $50 to $500 a month to keep things going. So how do you use all this info when pricing a project? The basic formula is that your total cost should equal the direct costs plus the indirect costs. But since indirect costs aren't tied to a specific job, you've got to allocate them somehow. One method is activity-based costing, basically spreading those costs based on how much shop time or machine time a project takes. Another option is the overhead rate method. You divide your total overhead by your total labor hours or material costs. For example, $6,000 in overhead divided into 12,000 in direct costs equals a 50% overhead rate. So for every $1 of direct cost, you add 50 cents in overhead. And honestly, there are a dozen different ways to calculate this stuff, each with its own pros and cons, and when it makes sense to use. But I'm just sharing what works for me, a one-person operation working out of a home garage. Since I usually only have one big project going at a time, it's pretty straightforward. all of my indirect costs for the month, like rent, insurance, software, whatever, get lumped into that one build. Simple, clean, and it keeps me honest about what each piece really costs to make. Okay, let's walk through an actual example. Say I'm building a custom walnut dining table. My direct costs are going to be walnut for, let's say, 1500, hardware 100. Usually this cost would be higher due to C-channels and legs, nuts and bolts, etc. But here I'm keeping it simple. Finish for $75. I usually finish to 1200 or 800 grit and at least 2 coats. Consumables 75. Labor 40 hours at $75 per hour for a total of 3000. And then a special line item. I call it ticketic. I budget about 100 here, and that stands for things I know I don't know. Basically all the hidden time sinks that don't show up in a formal log. And for direct costs more than 5000, I apply a 5% ticketic. This includes stuff like researching options, messaging clients, emailing back and forth, planning logistics, writing, photography, social media posts, or making trips to the wood store. Sometimes I'm renting a truck to get a wide slab planed. Other times I'm just sitting at the computer figuring things out. To be clear, this isn't the cost of the actual truck rental or an ad fee or anything like that. This is the value of my time spent coordinating those things. And honestly, every build has a ticketing portion. It's just part of the process. So, my total direct costs end up being 4,850. Now, the indirect costs for the month. Shop space for 250. This is what I allocate to the garage based on square footage and my expense for the property. Utilities, electricity, water, gas. I give this about 100, and this is inflated slightly because I really have not taken the time to measure the kilowatt hour consumption. I just feel like the juice here isn't worth the squeezing. Insurance, partial cost of about 50. Marketing, $40, mostly for the web hosting. Admin and software, about $40 for the apps that I'm using online. Maintenance and depreciation, I allocate about $50, and that's based on having around $4,000 worth of tools, and I'm expecting them to last me about 7 years with no resale value at the end. So basically, I'm just dividing 4,000 over 84 months. And yeah, after those 7 years, I figure I'll need to fully replace them. That's just how I personally look at tool lifespan in my shop. No actual hard and fast rule here. So the total indirect cost ends up being 530. So in my case, the total cost to build this table is 4,850 plus 530 for a grand total of 5,380. Now let's say you build 2 big pieces a month. So you split that 530 across both. That's 265 per project. So the total cost to build this table for you ends up being 5,115. And yeah, this gets trickier as you scale up. The more projects you're juggling and the more variety between them, the more complicated it gets to split those overhead costs fairly. Now for the price. If I want a 30% profit margin, I've got 2 ways to get there. A simple markup, 5,380 times 1.3 gives me 6,994. Or a margin method, 5,380 divided into 0.7 for 7,685 and 71 cents. The difference? Markup is just adding 30% on top. Margin is backing into the number, so 30% of the final price is profit. Either way, you're in the 7,000 to 7,700 range to make it worthwhile. Now, the real value in knowing your costs. This is why I appreciate all of the math here. I'm building custom pieces you can't just grab at a big box store. This is why I'm able to charge higher prices and still keep healthy margins. But to me, the most useful thing about all this math is that it tells me whether I should even build the thing in the first place. Let's say I'm building something available in my area for $5,000. And after I run the numbers, I decide I need to charge $7,000 to make it worth it. Well, there's my answer. I shouldn't bother building it. No guesswork. No, it feels worth it. Just clarity. At least not unless I'm adding value that justifies the higher price. For instance, I'm making a similar product but to a client's custom dimensions. That's why it's so important to know which part of the market you're actually building for. Are you competing with mass produced stuff, or are you offering something truly unique? I dive deeper into that in another video where I break down the furniture market. I'll drop the link in the description if you want to check it out. So, yeah, running the numbers might not be as fun as cutting dovetails or watching finish cure, but this stuff is what keeps your shop alive. If this helped, give it a like and check the description for more videos where I break down things like milling costs, tool ROI, and how I structure my builds. Got questions or want me to cover your specific case? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. See you in the next one.